Hi guys, my name is Liam, this is my hobby room, and today we're going to the modification station. We're going to be taking a look at modifying the Hydra Gundam, which you might have seen my review of. If you didn't, I'll link it down below in the description. As you might have seen, the Hydra Gundam leaves a lot to be desired in terms of proportions, articulation, general detail, so we're going to do our best and spruce it up. We're going to zhuzh it. We're going to give it an overall zhuzh, so we can take the detail and some of the nicer proportions that are baked into the Hydra Gundam as is and really make them shine. And we can do all that with some of the tools I'm about to lay out for you. Starting to customize your Gunpla is a very exciting decision, and there's a whole bunch of different supplies you can get to help you do that. The ones that I've laid out here are the basic supplies that I use for customizing Gunpla, and I'm going to go over them right now. So this here is a very robust material called Pla Plate or Plasticard. It comes in a variety of different shapes and sizes and thicknesses. This brand is called Evergreen Scale Models, and they make a lot of different shapes of this plastic styrene. So these are thin strips, these are extremely thin strips. I have a smattering of different rods and tubes in here. And these are just the sheets themselves, and there's a variety of different thicknesses here. I use Plasticard for things like adding detail, crafting my own parts, making diorama bits, polystyrene sheeting, Plasticard, Pla Plate, whatever. It's so important to customization. I highly recommend you pick some up from your local hobby shop. There's tons of it at BC Shaver and Hobbies. It's a great resource. Here's a pro tip. If you have any bread tags or bread clips, whatever these things are, whatever those are, save those. Those are polystyrene, and you can cut them up and use them with polystyrene cement and customize your Gunpla with those. Bread clips, polystyrene. Wow! The next thing is cement. This is Tamiya cement. There's two different types that I have here. This is the extra thin and the regular type. I use polystyrene cement on pretty much every model kit I make. Just because Gunpla are largely snap together kits doesn't mean there aren't applications for this lovely material. The most common use for polystyrene cement in Gunpla is to close seam lines. You can also use it to secure two pieces of polystyrene next to one another. So why polystyrene cement and not super glue? Well, super glue is a cyanoacrylate glue, and what that does is it creates a bonding layer, so it makes a sticky layer between two objects that holds them together. What polystyrene cement does is it takes the two plastic layers and it melts them together, so they're fundamentally bonded. There's no sticky layer, it's just... So cyanoacrylate superglue turns two objects into best friends, but polystyrene cement turns them into lovers. That doesn't mean there isn't a place for cyanoacrylate superglue. In fact, I advocate highly for its use. I think it's a really useful tool, but it's not a replacement for polystyrene cement. I think they both have their uses. Tamiya Basic Type Putty. This is a plastic putty that's super helpful for smoothing out the difference between two different types of plastic, for filling in divots and imperfections, and also for erasing your scribing mistakes. Mind you, if you have to rescribe through an area you filled in with this putty, it's going to be a little bit brittle. You might make a bit of a mess. Just be very gentle and go slowly. If you want to get into customizing your Gunpla and you don't have a whole bunch of money to spend on a variety of different supplies that you might not exactly know how to use yet, get some Plasticard, Tamiya Basic Type Putty, and get some polystyrene cement. That way you'll get a basic introduction and you'll get a feel for how to create detail and plastic parts for your kit, and then you might want to move on to other stuff in the future once you realize what you want out of customization. Another helpful tool is epoxy putty. This is the Tamiya Quick Type epoxy putty. It's two parts. You can make this to fabricate your own parts, to build onto other parts, to change the vertices on your plastic parts, and to just all around have a good time. So, if you want to make your own parts, it definitely comes in handy. Another great tool to have is a spudger. And a spudger is just a little metal spatula that you can use to spread putty, which is pretty much entirely what I use this for. I also use this for sculpting epoxy putty, and so I'll mix up my epoxy putty, put it onto my kit, or create my pieces with it, let it cure for a little bit, and then go back in with this tool with a bit of water and just kind of reshape it into to be something closer to what I want the finished product to be. Remember, when you're sculpting with epoxy putty, always keep your hands and tools wet with water, because otherwise it's gonna stick to absolutely everything. And here are some sanding implements which should speak for themselves. Starting to modify your Gunpla may seem like an insurmountable, daunting task, but it's actually quite simple once you identify the parts of your kits that you want to keep and the parts that you'd like to change. Once you identify those key elements, it's much easier to view the whole process as a process instead of just a chunk of work you have to do and not knowing where to start. So here's a potential time saver. First, we're going to talk about modeling support goods, MSG, which, you know, is a clandestine way to say Mobile Suit Gundam. Kotobukiya released these a while ago. They re-release them every now and then. These are just little plastic bits that you can use to spruce up your kits, like different thruster nozzles, detail pieces, and stuff like that. There's a brand called Wave. Wave makes a lot of superfluous little detail pieces that you can use to make any kit kind of special. When you go in to start modifying your Gunpla and you decide which pieces you'd like to keep, which pieces you'd like to change out, and what pieces you need to modify, you can start the process of cementing the pieces that you'd like to keep together, and then clearing out all those seam lines. As you can see, here is my version of the beam rifle. There is a seam line down here that I found really difficult to close up, so I put a piece of plastic card down over top of it, and I actually kind of like that detail of it. So the other piece that I will have to cover is right in here. You can see there's a seam line down there that I wasn't able to cover. I could sand that down with a bit of work, but it's just really recessed in there, and I'm just going to cover it up with a piece of plastic plate. So the beam rifle is pretty much entirely unchanged. I think it looks completely perfect as is, so that's how it's going to stay. As you can see with these pieces here, seam lines needed to be closed, some uneven plastic needed to be filled, and here you can see that I used some of these MSG parts to fill in little details. These pieces just needed some seam lines covered, some uneven plastic filled, and some rescribing. A lot of the plastic on these kits is pretty uneven. They're very old. So I modified these foot blades by a method I call plastic extension, where I basically take plastic card and use cement to melt it onto these parts here, and then once it's all cured up, I sand it down and putty it if it needs to be puttied to get rid of any seam lines that may have cropped up. So here is the regular one, and here is my version, so it's a little fatter. And you'll remember that this was the beam saber that the Hydra Gundam came with. So what I did was I took the beam saber handle and I just cut the beam out of it and drilled a small peg for a regular high-grade beam saber to go into. And then I have a beam saber handle that I can mount in the shield. So there's that. So here is the head. However, I thought its face had some kind of odd dimensions, so I added some plastic card onto the front of the face to give it a more of a Gundam style helmet. And I also, as you can see, I added some plastic detail in here because there's a large hole in that spot that looked kind of odd. And I'm extending the head's crest here into something that looks a little more, I don't know, wicked, I guess you could say. So that's just plastic card that I cut out, used some cement and melted the styrene onto here, and then sanded it down. It's not fully done yet. I need to do a little more cleanup on there, but I think it's going to look great when it's all done. So plastic card is really easy to work with. All you have to do is plan ahead. So if you take a mechanical pencil and a ruler, you can just draw your designs out on your plastic card. Pretend this is a design you wanted to cut out, and then just cut it out with your hobby knife or plastic scissors or something like that. Once you have your piece cut out of here, you can plan whether or not you'd like to make it thicker by adding more identical sheets on top of it, or build a box with it, or some kind of structure you can apply to your kit. Here is the torso segment. So what I'm going to probably do is saw out these areas here and put ball joints in them. And then I'm also going to put a ball joint in the bottom of this part and on top of this part. So basically it'll connect in there, and this top part will be able to swivel, and also that will help with some of the proportions as well. Overall, it's a good starting point, but I'm going to hack this up pretty severely. Now, the torso block had a few modifications I needed to make, and that was I had to saw out these old pegs here and put in a ball joint. You can see here that I've actually added some polystyrene bits to add some detail because it was very plain looking, and also you could see a bunch of the holes I drilled out in there. Actually, these are some of those bread bag ties that I was talking about earlier. So when you connect it to the torso via the corresponding ball joint I just inserted in there after drilling it out, it can do the shimmy. So it doesn't look like much now, but I think it will be much better when it's all painted up and put together. Plasticard and epoxy putty really are invaluable tools for customizing Gunpla. You might remember these side skirts from the Hydra Gundam had these really flimsy little joints here. I was able to cut down some plasticard, fill it in with epoxy putty, and glue these supporting struts into the inside because I just didn't want it to break. And this also helps them sit a little bit off the hip and just gives it some overall better proportions. And the legs were a bit of a complication because so much of them were just old, thin, and very undetailed plastic. So these vents before were completely closed off, and they were flush with the design. They had no depression to them, so they didn't really look like they were vents. So I used a pin vise drill, and I just drilled this area out, cut the plastic out of there, and then sanded it down, just to give it a more, a more three-dimensional look. I also removed the thrusters on the back of the legs because the thrusters had big seam lines down the middle of them, which makes them kind of a chore to close up and clean up. So I'll be adding aftermarket thrusters onto the back of the legs. I'm going to be adding some joints into the arms to replace the old peg and polycap design that they had. And how I'm going to do that is I'm going to use some extra joints that I got from the HG Build custom ball and arm arms. Ball and arm arms. What a name, huh? Some extra joints that I got from this set. A few of these option parts kits from the Build Fighters line have a lot of different bits and bobs you can use to customize your kits. As you can see, this is where I got those joints for the torso, the ball joints. There's a whole bunch in here. Now, I really like collecting these because you never know when you're going to need some of this stuff, and then it kind of saves you some time when you are doing your customizing. You don't necessarily have to scratch build everything out of plasticard. So what I'm going to be doing is I'm going to take this, and I'm going to size it up, measure it out, cut off this peg, saw out the inside here, and then slide this inside, open up this piece here, and make some room for it so I can slide it in there, and then you'll have an arm joint. So on to the next step. This arm is almost the exact width that this needs to be to hold this joint here perfectly. So I think what I might do, and it holds it at almost the perfect level, so what I might do is just put some cement here and fill in these holes and then cement it in so that it is in there perfectly and can bend like an arm would do. I've gone and cemented these two halves together, and you can see that piece in there hiding the seam line. And along this, I want to point this out because this is actually pretty important. Along these pretty important for customizing Gunpla, if you're not important for anything else. This won't help you do your taxes. So squeezing these two pieces together, you can notice the cement that I've put in there to hide the seam line is bubbling up actually up into this little kind of lip over the seam line. That's good. I know it looks gross, and you wouldn't want that on your finished product, but that means there's extra material that's pushing up there, and when it's cured, you can slice that off and sand it down. So you press the two pieces together and squeeze them kind of tight. So we're gonna set these aside, and they can cure, for about 5 or 6 hours, but generally I leave these overnight. Customizing can sometimes take a long time, but that's okay. It is definitely a process that you want to take slowly. You want to plan out. This one I've done a lot of the planning already. I just use a pencil and paper to draw out my designs and show how everything's gonna fit together. You don't have to be an artist to do that. As long as you understand your designs, that's all that matters. You're really the only person that's gonna be looking at them anyways. This part here is going down into the forearm, and this part up here is going up into the bicep area. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna cut off this peg, because it's not helping us anymore. So what I'm going to do is drill this out, and then cut out a rectangle, a perfect rectangle, to slide this whole piece in. So I have a variety of different pin vise drills here. You can get these in a variety of different brands and colors and whatever, it doesn't really matter. Pin vise drills are very, very useful, and I recommend picking them up if you plan on doing any customization. I don't use them for every project, but I do use them pretty often, which is why I didn't mention them before, but oh well, I'm mentioning them now, so here we are. So this is my pilot hole. I start with that, then I'm going to take a slightly bigger one and drill that out as well. And take my 3mm one. Luckily, these parts are almost completely hollow. Okay, this is good. This is a good example. As you see here, I wasn't really paying attention, and I've drilled this hole a bit off center. I just want to make a note of that now because I don't want this to be off center. I want it to be in the middle. So I'll take my trusty pencil here. I'm just going to put a few little marks on here. That tells me where to center it. Just want to make sure that I drill into these guidelines here. That's kind of as far as I can go out. And it's okay if the cavity that you drill out isn't the exact perfect size it needs to be right away. It's always better if it's a little too small than a little too wide, because if it's too small, you can always make it bigger. If it's too wide, you can you know, go back and add some plastic card in there, but it's going to be a little more complicated. So as you see here, you want to be careful when you're doing this. You don't slide off and cut yourself like I just almost did. So you this whole like working in front of the camera thing is really difficult. Hats off to all you YouTubers that do this on the daily. So we just want to cut out this area a little bit more as per the guidelines I drew on here, which were pretty rough, admittedly. But anyways, you can kind of see what we're going for here. We're gonna cut this out so this just slides right in there. This can be kind of a daunting level of modification for someone just getting into customizing their kits. But you know, the easiest way to do it is just to start doing it. There we go, perfect. There we are. Look at that. And once it's cemented, the arm will be able to do all kinds of arm-like things. So sawing off bits of plastic is another one of those things where if you started, you might feel a little overwhelmed or like, oh God, what am I getting myself into? But as long as you take it slow and you have kind of worked out in your head what you're going to be doing ahead of time, then I think you'll be all right. So what I'm going to be doing here is sawing off the top connector. So this is actually going to be inserted into the shoulder, and then this part here will be the arm. And I'm going to add a little connector of my own design, you know, to keep the arms, well, connected. So we're going to take a bit of that down and this down here. Oop, there we go. So how I'm going to do this is I'm going to put a plastic plate here, drill a hole through it, and then I'll do the same thing on this side. Another plastic plate, drill a hole through it, and put a 3mm peg in there, and that way it will be a, you know, it'll be able to turn like this. Now we've got our two bicep pieces. We're just gonna file down the tops to make sure that they're nice and even, and then we're gonna pop some plastic card on top of here and cut it down to size. The truer the edge, the less putty we're gonna have to use after, which is kind of nice. I suspect I might need some, but if I do this well enough, if I do this cleanly enough, then I won't need any. So, to make sure that the pieces are the same size, we're gonna just kind of trace around the edges here. And you don't have to be exact. It's actually better to give yourself a little bit of leeway just so when you're cutting this out, you don't, you know, make it too small because, you know, it's a reductive process. So. And then this piece as well. Again, want to make sure you're giving yourself plenty of room to make mistakes because mistakes do get made, and that's okay. That's how you learn. So we're just going to cut these out. Make sure to give myself a bit of buffer. And to do that, we're just gonna rough these up a bit so they have some tactile adhesion. And a good way to do that is to do this wet. Whenever you're sanding plastic art, it's not as big a deal, but if you're ever sanding putty, I would make sure to do it wet so you're not kicking up as much particulates. You can even use a bit of saliva, which I'm about to do. And then just give it a nice little circular sand. So we take some polystyrene cement and just brush it on pretty liberally and also on here. Now this is gonna have to cure for a while. Make sure to press down against a table or something. Make sure it's got lots of adhesion. And then the same thing for the shoulder connector piece. So we'll take the plastic that we sanded and our part and put some cement on there, cement on here, and just kind of stamp that down. Of course, then once they're cured, what we can do is take our pin vise drill, drill a hole through here, drill a tiny hole through here, and then connect these pieces via a peg, and they'll be able to turn like a bicep. Thanks very much for watching, you guys. I hope this has been helpful. I hope you've been able to get a sense of what the modification process looks like, at least what my modification process looks like. If you have any other questions, just chuck them down in the comments down below, and I'll take a look, and I'll hopefully be able to enlighten or elucidate you. Don't be afraid to ask questions and make mistakes. That's how you learn. I do both of those things all the time. So we're gonna leave things off here, and we're gonna come back in part 3 once I've finished painting it, and I've put all my decals on and everything, and I'll get to show you my finished Hydra Gundam. So I hope you guys have yourselves a great day. My name is Liam, this is my hobby room, and I'll see you guys next time. Ciao.